Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 19th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And of course, we're joined today by Alex Thomson, who'll be speaking by live Skype link from the Netherlands with Eastern approaches. What better place to start than the dark door of number 10, Mike?
Well, the headlines today, actually yesterday's news program garnered quite a response on YouTube, quite a lot of downvotes relative to normal. I think some people didn't like what we were saying yesterday, Brian, but the mainstream media today, a lot of the front pages being quite cynical about Theresa May's move, and I just chose this one from The Independent because it was possibly closest to the point we were making yesterday. Theresa May's ideological power grab will hold up Brexit negotiations. It's almost like she planned it that way.
So the Independent slightly unsure that this announcement was actually planned.
No, I think it's a slightly sarcastic statement. I think they're on the right page here. Our Prime Minister doesn't want a soft Brexit, a hard Brexit, or a compassionate Brexit. She wants a Theresa May Brexit where a general election win hands her the right to do whatever she likes with her country. Yeah. And that's basically the point we were making. So that's by Holly Baxter. Well, Alex, let's just take the opportunity to get your thoughts on the main points we were making on this yesterday.
Well, as it happens, Mike, I was discussing this with my mother, who I believe is actually watching us and may even be in the chat box. And she, and I think representative of a lot of Tory-leaning voters, who is, like many, disillusioned. But she said, I was watching yesterday and I couldn't quite understand why Brian and Mike were being so negative about Mrs. May. But I think the point is this, that Mrs. May is not in control. And I think the reason why she appeals to many of the middle generation and older generations, more intelligent voters like my mother, is that it looks as though she has the ship under control, and that this election is a way of her being stateswoman-like, as she was being in the Prime Minister's questions just now, and saying Sturgeon and Farron and Corbyn are united in their attempt to break up our United Kingdom and we won't have it. Well, to my dear mother and many others who think that way, just remember just one point about David Ellis's sources, and he took an admiral of 30, 40 years military experience in to see the Vote Leave campaign before the referendum last year. And this admiral came out in disbelief and crestfallen and said, do you know, David, I've been told that they're going to have an election for leader, that Cameron's going to resign after this referendum, that probably Mrs. May will be shooed in, and that then Mrs. May will be told to call a general election to kick the Brexit issue into the long grass. Now, that, I hope, is a demonstration to even the sceptics like my mother that Mrs. May is not in control.
Well, that's very interesting points. I think this was the main problem that people had with what we said yesterday, because people, for some reason, seem to believe that Theresa May is actually going to implement some kind of Brexit. I find this difficult, Brian, because suddenly people are believing what Theresa May is saying, and I'm not sure that she has the sort of background and the credibility to generate that kind of belief.
Did we see a bit of that on the run-up to the referendum on coming out for Brexit, that people wanted to believe that this is something that was really going to happen? Of course, we had people like Nigel Farage ramping up the idea that there was going to be a vote, and if people voted to leave the European Union, it was going to happen. And you saw people begin to ride with that. They believed it was real. Then we've seen the reality of what the Conservatives are doing. And now we've got the next scam coming along, but it's a sort of positive one. So people are beginning to ride with it, and then they're going to be disappointed. But my answer to whether people should trust Theresa May or not is a simple one. Let's go back to when she was Home Secretary, and Theresa May was fully aware of all the information around child abusers, historical and present, within the Westminster political system. And what action did she take to root those people out? The answer is absolutely none. But what action did she take to suppress whistleblowers? Well, she was very hot off the mark there. Melanie Shaw in prison And in a minute, we're going to be talking about the very brave Metropolitan Police Officer John Wedger, who spoke out about the massive cover-up in London, Westminster, of child abuse. And, well, shortly, we're going to be saying what's been happening to him. So Theresa May, not to be trusted. And, of course, she's wearing the clothes. She's had her hair done. She's got the makeup on. She's wearing the pearls. So the image is blue rinse. I'm a lady. You can trust me. I believe this is one of the most dangerous prime ministers this country's ever had. And she's dangerous because she hasn't got the mental acumen to make the decisions herself. She's being controlled from powers behind the scenes.
Alex, I think for me, there are two key issues here. The first is that if you look at what Theresa May has presented with regard to Brexit, and you compare that to what David Cameron was presenting in the run-up to the referendum, which was his renegotiated settlement with the European Union, the two positions are identical, but Cameron's position was based on the idea that we were staying within the European Union. May's position, she says, is to do with from the position that we're out of the European Union. But if the two policy positions are the same, then that doesn't add up. Something isn't right there. And the other point is that, as we've been highlighting over a number of different policy areas in the last several months, there are policy decisions being made that are being pushed through without parliamentary oversight and without any kind of whimper, not even a whimper from Parliament. And so we're seeing already the sort of the policy decisions and the things being done which are undemocratic. So if it's undemocratic, then what kind of system are we actually running at the moment? And those are the things that concern me most. And if she ends up with a large majority where there's nobody in opposition really capable of, well, maybe the case that we are in that situation already, but if she has this big majority and really has no problem shooing in all kinds of things, we're in a pretty dangerous position.
We are, Mike, and it's all the more dangerous for us thinking that we have a parliamentary government. On the continent, they are aware that ministers and hangers-on are just appointed directly and rule by decree. Here, we are still misled. And as again, I was just catching a bit of PMQs an hour or two ago. We're misled by all that farce and that theatre and, Commons as the cockpit of the nation stuff into thinking that whoever's strongest in arguments there will prevail. But of course, the MPs are not even in the chamber when it's not Prime Minister's questions. They're signing through statutory instruments. They're going to sign through a huge batch now, which is going to transfer the whole of the EU's acquis communautaire into the law of England and Wales and the law of Scotland. So they're not even interested. They lack the wherewithal and the character. And if you have the character without the mental acumen, that's not so bad. I mean, a nation can save itself through such times if those are its political leaders. But if you have neither of them, then you're really scuppered, I think. And the continental press is seeing this because it's talking today and yesterday about May pulling a rabbit out of the hat, May playing the Joker card or the Trump card or whatever else they're seeing. They're obviously seeing that this was in reserve. This trick to play and it was being held by the people around Mrs. May who are steering her.
I think you've got to be careful calling it the Trump card these days, Alex.
Oh, yes, of course, because Trump is something else altogether now.
Yeah.
Well, he's really the Joker. It gets a bit confusing, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yeah. Okay, well, now this Guido Fawkes here saying that the Tory election fraud issue is now dead. Do you think that's the case? Surely election fraud is election fraud, whether there's a new election or not.
Well, it's just a question of people forgetting anything that's more than half an electoral cycle ago. The 2017 Parliament, as usual, is going to not contain everyone who was in the previous Parliament. We see a lot of Tory and Labour mid-career MPs considering hopping now. A couple have already said that they're going to hop off the wagon now. And even those MPs on the Conservative side who may stand again and be re-elected shortly are going to be somewhat insulated from the Crown Prosecution Service and police investigations into their misspending of money. If it was last Parliament, it's going to be yesterday's news. I mean, who's talking now about the expenses scandal of 2009? Even during the 2010 to 15 Parliament, that died a death, and now it's just old news, isn't it? So I think that if you look at the dozen English constabularies, counties, which have submitted files to the CPS, it's clearly from one end of England to the other, it was a problem with the Conservative MPs and their that their schemers misspending, deliberately misallocating funds for political campaigning. And this is one of the many things which is always buried in the long grass at such times.
Well, let's come on to that subject, to the child abuse around Westminster. It was quite extraordinary because Mike had a slide yesterday with the new head of the Met Police, Cressida Dick, on it. And what he was pointing out was that if you looked at the words of a public talk, it was almost as though the aim was to just forget about anything to do with child abuse and to get on with real policing, which is apparently about diversity. Well, we were called early this morning by the Metropolitan Police officer who was brave enough to stand up and be counted. This is John Wedger. We can't show his face at the moment. We hope that fairly shortly we'll be able to make him fully public. But this is the man who stood up to blow the whistle on police cover-up, Met Police cover-up of the abuse, trafficking, prostitution, deaths of children in London. And what did he say? That he had personal experience of the cover-up involving not only the police, but also senior members of Parliament, local authorities, and even the charities that stand up at the moment taking our money, saying they're there to protect children. Now, what's been happening over the last couple of days is the Met Police have dramatically upped the bullying and harassment. And so John has had detectives coming to his house suggesting that he's neglecting his youngest boy, who is an older teenager. So this isn't the question of leaving a young child in the house. This is now a cooked up investigation that he's leaving his youngest teenage son on his own for periods, which is absolutely what John Wedger is doing, because his oldest son has been in intensive care for a number of weeks. So it is remarkable. Cressida Dick comes in post. This is a common purpose trained woman, no experience in the Met Police, disastrous performance in the Menendez episode. She comes in, and just at the moment that the Tories are calling an election where they need a squeaky clean image, the Met Police are piling on the pressure for John Wedger. So this is a man who told the truth about the cover-up of child abuse in Westminster. He went to the policing minister, Brendan Lewis, who did absolutely nothing. Theresa May herself has done nothing to help. But could it just be that the Tories now need all mention of child abuse squashed so that they get their silky smooth election? This is very unpleasant stuff, and we will be reporting more closely on John Wedger.
Well, the unaccompanied children issue is back in the press today, or yesterday rather, in The Independent. 239 unaccompanied refugee children disappeared from UK care in 2015. I'm glad they're finally catching up on this. This is apparently as a result of a joint investigation by BBC 5 Live and BuzzFeed News, only about a year late, but there you go. Freedom of Information request 140 local authorities across England and Wales have revealed 51 children disappearing from care in October 2015 alone. We'll just remind everybody that this report came out a month or two ago. Trafficked and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are going missing from UK care at an alarmingly high rate. They're saying 30% of all UK child trafficking victims and 13% of unaccompanied children disappeared from care services in the UK, and this is from the NGO ECPAT UK and also the charity Missing People. So we keep that in mind, and we remember that, of course, Tim Farron was who is the Liberal Democrat leader, is the man who has pushed the pressure on this to get more and more unaccompanied children into this country, but still doesn't want to say what he's doing to protect them once they're here. He is still utterly silent on it. Linda Lauderdale, who has kept on with this case and kept writing to Tim Farron asking for comment, still getting nothing in return.
Well, they don't comment on it, Mike, because any MP that stands up now to try and get the truth out about the abuse that is happening, not just to 1, 2, 10 children, this is happening to thousands and thousands of youngsters across UK. And of course, it can only happen with the connivance of the British government. So none of these people dare mention it. We know that some of the MPs openly admit they are scared at what they see happening around them, but the majority of them are just going to play cool, play the game, because they don't want to be caught up in it. Well, last night, thanks to Freedom Talk Radio, had a very interesting discussion with Darren Thornham. Now, this is the man who was all over the press and media a few months ago in relation to accusations of child abuse and paedophilia at Westminster level. It was quite remarkable to be able to speak to him direct, and very measured, very quietly spoken, very organised in what he had to say. And we contrasted how we found that man with, for example, this article from the Telegraph, where it said, part of the article said, an investigation by the Telegraph has uncovered the troubled past of the witness whose lurid claims prompted a 12-month police inquiry. But the man we were speaking to live last night was very measured in what he had to say. And of course, what he was saying is exactly what John Wedger, the Metropolitan Police Officer, is saying, is that there has been a massive cover-up of this abuse ring running through Westminster. And Alex, you were able to listen into that interview. What was your impression of Darren Thornham speaking?
Brian, I think it's not too much to say that Darren Thornham is the first of the child sexual abuse witnesses. Well, I will call them witnesses because they're talking to the alternative media because they won't get a hearing in the establishment. So not just victims, but witnesses. He's the first CSA witness I've ever heard, and I think that you've ever heard too, Brian, whom we could clearly categorize as an entirely well-spoken, middle-class, and I'm not being snobbish here, but it's important if you want to persuade the country, middle-class, well-educated man. And it's no accident because he was groomed and abused by Peter Righton, Righton, who was not just any old pederast, he was the establishment's favoured child psychologist and child sexual abuse theorist who went around training local authorities on these matters while himself having a harem of boys whom he was buggering. Now, it's always going to come back and bite you, and Righton has after his death, had some exposés written about him by quite some Middle England journalists who've realised that they were taken in. And so here comes Darren Thornham, well worth following on Twitter, at Darren CSAS, standing for Darren Child Sexual Abuse Survivor. And he comes out with an hour and a half of detail, solid detail to you, Brian, even while his phone is being tampered with during the interview. And he's having to speak to you on speakerphone towards the end with you ringing him back. Detail, and a solid understanding too of what he can say on air and off air so as not to prejudice the cases of others. So I think that we've actually leapt into a higher league of child sexual abuse supporters speaking out with Darren Thornham, and I think that the establishment paedophile rings can jolly well watch out, because if he's going to speak, more of his ilk are going to speak behind him.
Alex, thank you very much for that. I'm just going to say to our wider audience today, if you have any doubts about whether you can trust the government, or you think you can trust the British government, you've got to come back to this issue. If we have a British government which is prepared to lie and cover up the abuse of children in the United Kingdom, that can be British children, but it also be children that have been imported from Syria, for example, can we trust them on any other subject? My contention is that the answer to that, of course, has got to be no. This is a criminal government which is going to lie on any policy issue it chooses.
Alex.
I think there's just one more pointed point to make on that, Brian. A lot of good people and people who've served the country in various capacities as public servants or what have you, as teachers, they cannot imagine that someone who looks plausible, like Mrs. May, could actually have the knowledge, like Mrs. Thatcher before her, that many of her closest confidants were involved in pederasty and the rape, murder and torture of children, and keep a straight face about it. Because good people cannot really imagine that others who are playing the act of public servants would let this go on around them for the sake of not rocking the boat and continuing to have their people in power. But I'm afraid it's been multiply proven that that is exactly what Mrs. Thatcher and Her Majesty the Queen have done for the last half century.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Alex, let's move on to international stuff, and we'll begin with this. The headline, How Eritrea Keeps Eritreans in Europe in an Iron Grip. Give us the background to this.
The background is that the head of the presidential chancellery or apparatus then in Eritrea, a man called Yemane Gebreab, so the chief ideologue for the wicked Eritrean regime, came to the Netherlands for the youth conference of the Eritrean ruling party. Eritrea is a one-party state. If you're not of the right church or political party, you get locked up in shipping containers in Eritrea. Western governments know about this. There was an older group of refugees who left in the 80s and 90s, but they were actually of the faction which has since gained power in Asmara. So you now have the children of those older refugees in Europe saying, we fled Eritrea, but they're actually chums with the current equally wicked Eritrean regime. And their children grew up in places like the Netherlands, unaware of what the old or the new regime was about. So they have had it talked into them through continual interference by the current Eritrean government that everyone who's Eritrean by blood needs to support the current Eritrean regime. We have an exact replica of what Erdogan's doing. If anything, Eritrea is even worse than Turkey because people get tortured to death in Eritrean prisons, which doesn't happen very often, if at all, in Turkey, although it's not a good place to be locked up either, Turkey. So we've got two of these particularly daring and cynical regimes on the fringes of Europe now, sending their ever-expanding youth population into Europe to claim asylum, benefits, and whatnot. And the Dutch and the Swiss have started working out that the Eritreans are going back to their countries because they weren't refugees at all. They were ordered in some cases by the local authorities, you will seek refuge in Europe or your family is for it. They're basically forced marched to the boats, and some of them perish on the crossing. Get into Europe, get their asylum status, go back for holidays or family contact in those countries. And now Eritrea is taking this a step further, this Marxist regime, by going to Europe, like Erdogan's already done, and wagging a finger at them and saying, it's your duty to do as we tell you. You see what's happening is that European taxpayers' money is deliberately and with the connivance of some quite big corporate and mafioso interests being siphoned back to these countries. Some of these asylum claimants, whether by duress or otherwise, are going and claiming several times under different names, under the threat that if they don't, the intelligence network of Eritrean embassies in Europe will track them down and cause harm to their families back home.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Now let's move on to Russia. We're beginning with Western journalists and the Western journalists' attitude to Russia. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov scolds US journalists for shouting out during Rex Tillerson's meeting. This is going back a week, but it seems to be something that isn't limited to one journalist, Alex.
No, the one we can see here is a journalist. A lot of them are female journalists who you'd expect to be better in their manners, but at odd moments, like Lavrov taking his seat at a conference table, they're shouting out, please give us an answer on this. And Lavrov snapped at this one and said, who brought you up? Who gave you your manners? There it is. I've captured the screenshot. So this was a lady from NBC, but it's not the only one. We have more.
So the first one was Andrea Mitchell from NBC. This is Margaret Brennan from CBS.
I've put on here the auto-translate captions, and you can see here that she's in a press conference in Moscow, where the protocol is perfectly clear that you sit listening. As you can see, in fact, to the bottom right of the picture, journalists are listening to the incredibly professional simultaneous interpretation, Russian-English. And she's basically ignoring the well-established convention that in the host city, the foreign minister speaks in his own language and interpreted back into English and says, I wonder if I could indulge you to answer in English, if you would, sir. And he shows exactly what he thinks of her by answering perfectly well in Russian, although, of course, he's perfectly fluent in English. This is a slap in the face to the interpreting in Russia, which is some of the best in the world. And it's absolute arrogance. We even saw it with Krishnan Gurumati, I think it was, asking on behalf of the BBC, Guido Westerwelle, when he was appointed German foreign minister a few years ago, in a conference in Germany, asking a question in English at a meeting without interpretation, which is even more discourteous. And Guido Westerwelle blew a fuse and said, Es ist Deutschland here, as he jolly well should have done. So there's quite a trend of it. And here's another one, which is a bit more historical.
Yeah, this was Vladimir Putin being doorstepped by the BBC.
Yes, this is in 2014. You'll find that on Inessa S's channel. And this was quite a serious BBC journalist. I forget his name just now. I
John
think you
Sweeney.
had it there. John Sweeney,
John Sweeney.
quite a big foreign correspondent type, and he was just lurking in a corridor a couple of years ago, waiting for Putin to come past. And the mustachioed chap in the foreground there is Dmitry Peskov, who is not even Putin's interpreter. He's the press spokesman. So people are being prevailed upon by these BBC and leading American networks in corridors and as foreign ministers sit down at the table and being shouted at. How can you justify your policy? And yet Putin and Lavrov remain calm and answer perfectly calmly, in Russian, of course. And poor old Peskov, who's not a professional interpreter, had to do his best to do that into English and did so very well. It shows you something about the presumption of BBC and US journalists.
Yeah, but perhaps the Russians losing a little bit of patience, or is that a little unfair? So the headline here from International Business Times is Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov mutters effing morons during a Saudi press conference.
Of course, the wonderful thing about these moments is that it can all be denied, or if the words are confirmed, he can say, well, you see, I was talking about something else. But the Saudis were in a conference with him talking about their support for ISIS, at which point he waited for his remarks to be interpreted from Russian to Arabic, and meanwhile picked up his phone where he may have seen a message come in and scribbled in some papers, and he was there muttering under his breath in Russian, effing morons. It's a very polished diplomatic signal. After 20 years of dealing with hot mics, one does not make a mistake like this unless one wishes to.
Yeah, indeed. And Lavrov again on Ukraine this time.
Here he is calling the Ukrainians a bunch of madmen, and I believe Brian and David Ellis's sources have been feeding through that Putin has also been saying the same directly, that the Russian government has been sitting with its head in its hands the last couple of years, saying, how can we deal with the Ukrainians and the West? There doesn't seem to be any sane person among them. So Lavrov is there saying, we have doubted the mental adequacy of the Kiev regime for some time on the particular matter of the Minsk agreement monitoring, because the Ukrainian government's not even serving its own interests at the moment. It's just acting as a glove puppet.
And it's not just Lavrov, because Putin as well. And here we've got a little bit of video clip where he's saying, look, just recently we witnessed missile strikes on Syria by the US. And he goes on to say, and how did their NATO allies react? He said they nod along like bobbleheads, is the translation here.
Very colourful language. What he said in Russian is "kitayskie bolvanchiki," which is literally like the Chinese dummies, is what that means. The ones that go like this, and not a nodding dog either, but one of those porcelain fat Buddhas with a nodding head, in them. And he actually does the action as well. So we've got to the stage where Putin is telling his national, well, we could say public broadcaster, Russia Channel 1, the NATO allies don't have a brain of their own, nor, just like his foreign minister is saying, Ukraine doesn't. They all follow orders from a couple of people in the Pentagon and the US State Department.
Right, well, sticking with Lavrov for a second, yesterday or the day before, he was in a press conference with the Eritrean president, foreign minister, sorry, and he was answering some questions afterwards, discussing his relationship with the United States, and basically saying that, well, he's going to ignore McMaster and he's going to listen to Trump. So Lavrov said, this is a complex question. I have no desire to comment on the unsubstantiated accusations made against Russia. First, they concerned Ukraine. Now the focus has shifted to Syria. I've seen media reports in the US or British officials are saying that they could cooperate with Russia if it behaved in Ukraine and Syria. And now the Korean Peninsula has been added to the list. It appears that we must do something for somebody on the Korean Peninsula too, although we didn't create the chaos that's reigning there. ISIS and before it Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra are the offspring of opportunistic projects that involved our Western partners, primarily the many US administrations, which began by supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and praising them as freedom fighters, and continuing this policy in Iraq and Libya. And now these countries have been ruined. It appears that we must pay for the consequences. This is not how partners act. This approach is not acceptable to us. We will not listen to what President Trump's advisor has said, but what President Trump himself has said, that he is optimistic when it comes to improving relations with Russia. We're ready for this. And this is an interesting position from Lavrov, because what he's basically possibly acknowledging is that it's the people he believes, it's the people that are around Trump which are causing the current chaos, shall we say, in relations, international relations, and that perhaps he sees a little bit more hope in Trump himself. Any thoughts on that?
I would agree that that's what he thinks, Mike, because before Trump's election, when everyone was thinking what a great thaw this will be in Russo-US relations, Lavrov and Peskov said, well, we'll wait and see, because they knew even then that whether it's Jared Kushner or Sean Spicer or Mattis or some of the others in that clique had their stranglehold around Trump, and that he wasn't actually capable, because he has no background in diplomacy and foreign relations, although he's a very capable businessman. He had no means of telling truth from error, or truth from folly, shall we say. So that's why they were tentative at that point. And by the same token, Lavrov is saying, oh, actually, there is some hope, because now the world is beginning to see that the people around Trump are warmongers and are perhaps misleading him with his perhaps well-placed but ill-informed ideas of patriotism and an American Renaissance. So there is some hope. And if I see Lavrov there sitting there with an African foreign minister, and this is what the fourth shot we've just shown in sequence of Lavrov having a press conference, what foreign minister in the West is actually doing their job like Lavrov? You know, foreign ministers are meant to hold bilaterals and go to conferences all the time. I don't see Johnson or indeed the US Secretary of State sitting down anything like with that regularity with counterparts, particularly not with emerging markets and medium powers, which is where the growth is for your influence and your trade. I just don't see that foreign ministers in the West are doing their jobs. They're grandstanding.
This is an interesting point, Alex, because Boris Johnson is actually traveling around the world quite a lot at the moment, but it's not getting any media coverage, and you've got to say, well, what is he up to?
Yes, he could be stitching things up. Particularly, I think we need to watch the Far East, Southeast Asia, where we're getting several indications, I think, that the Royal Navy and soft power are being intertwined so that Britain maintains some kind of dominance. Even though we're a bit of a dead hand now, we don't actually have anything to sell. But we do seem to be wanting to keep up our influence there. And yes, Johnson does go to Africa a lot, doesn't he? But what he's doing there does not seem to be pursuing bilateral interests so much as selling big ideas.
That's absolutely right. Now, Lavrov, of course, discussed unsubstantiated accusations. And of course, most of the unsubstantiated accusations against Russia, at least with regard to Trump and interference in the Trump administration, have come from British intelligence services, it seems, or ex-British intelligence services. Well, this is an interesting thing which seems to have blown up in Germany at the moment, because the allegation is that Angela Merkel has had secret briefings from MI6, according to this article on Politics Home. But this is an article which is originally published in Focus magazine, which is Germany's second largest weekly. And they are saying that Merkel has met the heads of the three branches of British intelligence, MI5, MI6 and GCHQ, twice so far, the article suggests, get a briefing on terrorist threats against Germany. And German officials really commenting about her, asking why then is she traveling to England? Does she no longer trust her own people? And of course, the timing of this is very interesting, because we're only a couple of weeks before an election in Germany. Alex, but is this normal behaviour for a European leader to receive briefings from the three intelligence services in Britain?
No, it's pretty unheard of for all three heads of service to brief the Prime Minister together. They are meant to meet at the Joint Intelligence Committee, the JIC, and the JIC produces papers every week, the first copy of which goes to the Palace, the second to the Prime Minister, and so on. And those red boxes containing the JIC assessments are the intelligence briefing. We don't do, sit down the table, hushed, excited briefings directly from heads of intelligence agencies. It is filtered and assessed by the JIC. We've been doing that since 1935 in Britain, and that's how, until the fiasco of 2003 with Iraq, how we avoided intelligence being oversold or misassessed. There was always the three agencies and the other equivalents around the table producing a feed which was then given in writing. And if the intelligence agencies wish to pass something on to Germany, which is not a Five Eyes partner, the route is that the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the BND, Germany's own foreign intelligence service, I should say, not domestic, that would then receive from its counterpart from MI6 and GCHQ the report with the necessary sanitization and pass that on to the German state chancellery. So all the usual routes have been short-circuited here. More particularly, I see in the Regional Focus report here But the latter of these two meetings, not one, but two, was held in October 2015 in Chequers, the country residence of the Prime Minister. And it says that Hannigan was there. They focus on Hannigan of GCHQ, who's just resigned because the Germans are up in arms about GCHQ and NSA spying in Germany. But then they go on to say that Alex Younger and Andrew Parker were there, the MI5 and MI6 heads. And of those, of course, they're naming Younger last. But I'm sure that Younger and MI6 was in the lead because that's always the way it is. A small number of senior MI6 and cabinet office people, I think, have taken this opportunity to do what they have increasingly been accused of in other countries, which is shape elections and shape wars, effectively.
And what are your thoughts on the timing of this? And I mean, how would this information have got out? Has this been leaked from the British end, or has somebody in Germany managed to get hold of this somehow, do you think?
I doubt it's from the German end. I just don't think that intelligence of a couple of years ago would have got out to a German magazine source, because at the Auswärtiges Amt, the German Foreign Ministry, no one would probably know about this. Well, they would have set up the meeting, that's about all. Perhaps the German Federal Chancellery has got a mole, but it wouldn't make any sense to leak this now from the German side. We have to take the step of cui bono analysis. To whom does it benefit? Well, I can't see any benefit of it coming out just before Merkel's facing a tight election against Martin Schulz. On the other hand, it would benefit, of course, some of the British intelligence, particularly the clique around C, the head of SIS. It'd benefit them, because it would be a way of saying almost smarmily to the Germans, we've got Merkel in our pocket and she's not with you anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting stuff. Well, a quick advert. Less than 3 days to go for the British Constitution Group Moot, the meeting in Nottingham to talk about reasserting the rule of law. If you haven't got a ticket, please get online and buy one. We're definitely into high numbers. I think it's going to be a really fantastic event, but that hall can take 900 people at full capacity. Help us fill it, because will be part of the power of this meeting. We've also got a plea here that there's a Mr. Ken Palmerton who's looking for help with travel from Fleetwood in Lancashire to the BCG meeting on Nottingham. So if you can do anything, offer a lift or help in any other way with travel, please get in touch with Eddie at thebritishconstitutiongroup.com, and that will be much appreciated. This man has got some really good knowledge, which we'd like to get at the British Constitution Group event.
Okay, Alex, let's have a brief look at this lady, because it was recently the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. What was she? She was really getting excited about it.
Yes, I mean, this is quite laughable. Just look at this young German teacher who's got no political qualifications, no nous of any kind. And with her expansive hand gestures, she's saying, I think the EU, which is celebrating its 60th birthday, is simply wonderful. All these cultures, all these nations gathering together their resources to build a better world of peace. And she has utterly no idea, I think, that the EU is governed from its centre and by corporations and by the CIA, and has nothing to do with the various wonderful, vibrant cultural insights of the Greeks, the Portuguese, and the Finns. But it shows how the EU is being sold to a new and clueless generation.
Yeah, well, that of course is part of the sort of divide over the Brexit issue, that we are selling out the younger generation. So this is not just a story that's being told in the UK then?
No, I can see someone in the chat box saying, when I was young, I was a bit stupid too. And that's the point, particularly with German young people. They're by no means dumb, quite the opposite, but they get carried away with idealism. And if they've been told for 20 years, since birth basically, that Germany's bad and the EU is good, which, by the way, is one of the proofs that the EU is a German deep state project at a certain level, because it's a way of replacing negative feelings with positive ones. But if they've heard that all their life, then of course they're going to believe that the EU is the best thing since sliced bread. This is being issued, of course, to cover up the damage done by the Brexit squabble, and in order to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Rome, a time at which, of course, Britain kept out officially. But even then, we had some younger mandarins who were saying, well, we need to be in it at some stage, and we'll have to use subterfuge to get there.
Yeah.
Well, let's stay on the EU theme, but dig a little bit deeper than that young lady would be looking at. So we're going to go straight into the EU force operating in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And thank you very, very much to the viewer that pointed this out to us, a YouTube clip with a handover of that EU force. This ceremony took place on the 28th of March. If I got my date right, the 29th of March, technically we were coming out of the EU with Brexit. And what was happening was the handover of control of this force from one British officer to another. We've got here General Bradshaw was the man in post. I don't know why he's looking so unhappy. Maybe he's got to come back to UK and actually do some proper soldiering instead of playing at EU politics. He's obviously a big man for the EU. Here he is cradling the EU flag as it's handed over to, I think that's the incoming commander, a lesser ranker, not the full operational control. But this is a massive parade. They had bands, they had cameras, they had flags. And here's the new...
Sorry, did they have a UK flag?
They did, yes. Lost there amongst the general brightness of the material. So here's the incoming man, General Sir James Everard, operational commander of EU Force Althea. And he says in the video, it's a great privilege to be back in Bosnia-Herzegovina again and to take over command of Op Althea, the EU4 Op, of course, for the 13th year of delivery. So the British government is telling us, Michael Fallon is telling us that we're coming out of the European Union, but behind the scenes, British military driving ever deeper into this unified EU structure. And with an eye on the clock, let's just have a look at a bit of the detail here, because of course it's saying this operation was launched in December 2004. We've got 7,000 troops. It's talking about Berlin Plus arrangements, and I have to admit I didn't get time to have a look at these, but essentially this is the European Union as a force taking over a role that had previously been conducted by NATO to stabilise that war-torn region. Well, let's bring in the British General again, and we've said here, why is he implementing an EU political objective? Why can we say that? Because if we get into the detail of this operation, this is one of the things it says. Through its presence in the country and its support to the local authorities, EU4 remains an important and visible contribution to the EU's efforts in assisting Bosnia-Herzegovina on its path towards EU membership. So a totally political agenda being driven, and it's being driven by a British general, but we're coming out of the EU apparently, Mike. Well, and let's bring in Michael Fallon. This is another part of the quote from that document. It says the European Union's common security and defence policy includes the gradual framing of a common defence policy, which might in time lead to a common defence. Well, of course, it's not in time. That is being conducted at the moment. We can now show that we've got British generals helping push it. So Conservatives lying, Michael Fallon, maybe he's confused, maybe he doesn't know. And we'll add in this because this gets very interesting. If you have a look at what the EU policy through this group is, well, it's equality between men and women. So we've got another political agenda being promoted by the British Army. Should we be surprised? Well, no, because here he is boasting that he's been given an LGBT award as a straight individual, if I understand this correctly. I'm not an expert in this subject, but I did notice that he was pleased to get this award standing in front of a corrupted British national flag that was sponsored by a bank which seems to me to be fraudulent, MBS.
RBS.
RBS.
It certainly seems to be trading while insolvent.
Trading whilst insolvent. So we've got the British Army decimated with men, equipment and morale, and we've got this general playing at gender politics. I want to wince, Alex, when I look at this stuff. These people are either stupid or they're heavily politically reframed.
The actions of our generals, admirals, and air marshals, Brian, is particularly deplorable. And David Ellis is quite right to draw attention repeatedly to the Commandant General of the Royal Marines, the CGRM, who spends most of his time tweeting now about the wonderful things the EU is doing as a navy, apparently combating piracy. Again, playing around with EU flags, taking commands from civilians from very questionable Eastern European bureaucracies who've got themselves into the EU. And as for the Berlin Plus agreement, you'll actually find some mention of that now on the chronology, which we've built up on the EU military unification landing page of our website. If you go through from that, you'll find a chronology. Berlin Plus was the stage in, well, 99, it was preliminarily agreed, but in 2002 it took effect, that from now on, if NATO gets tired of a peacekeeping mission in some godforsaken Balkan state, then the EU can take it over using NATO assets and then proclaim and pretend that it's EU military saving the day, when in fact there is no EU military, or hasn't been heretofore. When Georgia had its war in 2008, the OSCE was unable to patrol the areas of conflict anymore, and at that point it was suggested that they too should get an EU military peacekeeping force under the Berlin Plus agreement. So the borders, it didn't go ahead, that one, but there's continual pushes for the last decade or more to allow the EU to pose using NATO assets and just sticking an EU Velcro-backed flag on the soldiers basically, and claiming that they're fulfilling a peacekeeping mission, whereas in fact it's NATO that provided the funding and the assets.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is creating the brand before the institution existed.
Yes, again, this is what David Ellis, in some of the articles I've helped him write, he correctly identifies as brand destruction of the British military and replacing it with the brand of the EU. The other arm of that, of course, is deliberately persecuting, in some cases for the third time, prosecuting and persecuting veterans of the Northern Ireland conflict, the soldiers, actually, the peacekeepers in that conflict, where there's no new material, but it's suddenly politically expedient to keep hounding them, to keep Sinn Féin sweet. And Robin Horsfall led a protest in London about this the other day. You can find it easily on Facebook. And he read out a letter at Horse Guards on Good Friday. Well, he said a lot of good things, but one of them was that we've written to Mrs. May and she's done nothing to help. She is Mrs. Maybe. She's let it all through. And he said the next letter will have to be to the Queen. Because of this, there's two prongs of brand destruction. Tell the young people don't go into the military or you'll get prosecuted until you're 80 years old. And on the other hand, present the idea of the wonderful EU military, which doesn't yet exist, using NATO taxpayers' money instead.
Well, if anybody wants to see the timeline that's led to the EU military unification that we now know exists, go to the UK Column website. In the right-hand column, there is a link that says EU military unification. Have a look at that, and please share it. Please share it. Now, very briefly, Alex, we'll just end on this one. Nothing to see here. US carrier still thousands of miles from Korea, and the New York Times with a similar headline here: aircraft carrier wasn't sailing to deter North Korea as US suggested, and they were showing this map showing the Carl Vinson heading south, actually. So what on earth is going on here?
Well, Sean Spicer, the president's press secretary, was claiming in the White House that this vessel, this carrier, was being sent up to Korea to saber rattle, but the very US Navy itself had already shared a picture of it, the lower dot there, on the 15th of April, heading the wrong way, that is south towards Australia, through the Sunda Strait between two Indonesian islands, on the way to joint training, I think, with the Royal Australian Navy. So the aircraft carrier was heading the wrong way, but the mere invoking of US aircraft carrier being roughly in the right part of the world was held by Mr. Spicer to be enough to frighten the Koreans, the North Koreans. Of course, that won't frighten any regime, particularly a paranoid and carefully intelligence-checking one like the North Koreans. That will have been demolished in 30 seconds. But it's not for North Korean consumption; it's for Western consumption. Much like we like to saber rattle with virtual aircraft carriers that exist on a drawing board that haven't been built yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to just mention RBS?
No,
you don't. Okay, we will end there. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Some really interesting analysis of what's going on. We say that Britain is entering some very dangerous times. And of course, if there is a massive Conservative majority, they can do exactly as they wish. but we'll continue to report on that. We're also going to say get those tickets for the British Constitution Group event. It's not enough to talk about what's happening. It's doing that counts, and that's what that event is going to be about. We'll end on a note that the UK column needs your support, needs your financial support. If you're not a subscriber, please join us and subscribe. We can only keep doing what we do with your help and support. Thanks very much
just
for
before
joining
we go,
us.
we should just remember that tonight is the UK column monthly meeting in the George.
Indeed. In the George, Plimpton, Devon. If you're local, come along and have a chat and enjoy an evening of good people together. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.